Good morning, once again.
Good morning.
Oh, hey, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Somebody's awake. Glad to hear that. It's good to be here again with you and I'll be able to share a message with you. All right, so I don't need the headset, right? These are good? We're all good? Okay. So just to kind of fill you in on a few things in Youth for Christ. Last week, Zach was here, and next week, neither of us will be here. So I don't know, you're on your own next week. I don't know. But it's Zach and Caleb, Jay, Lauren's on staff with us that runs our Parent Life program for pregnant teens. And James runs City Life and Parent Life, or City Life and Campus Life for Mid Valley, and then also working on one for Lakeland. So we've got quite a number of staff people, and several of us do get the privilege of speaking in churches. So that's ringing just a little bit. So it's a great privilege for us. Zach mentioned to you last week that 14 of our kids at the beach the week before got baptized, and that was really pretty awesome. I'm always leery because I know, parents sometimes are like, "Well, I want to see my kid get baptized," but the kids really want to get baptized in front of their friends and take a stand for Christ with their friends, and where God has really met them in our conference at the beach. And so that has really been a special opportunity that we've gotten to do a handful of times over the last 30 years, and that's been really pretty neat. But the really cool part was, like, you're talking about having a baptism. I'll tell you what, it's a significant time. It's not when, I'm familiar with Alliance theology. I was ordained in the Alliance, for some of you that didn't know that. And when you get saved and you get baptized, baptism doesn't have anything to do with your salvation. It has to do with your obedience, and it represents what God has already done in your life. And so the teens that got baptized in our group just were willing to stand in front of their friends, and it was pretty neat. So if you would continue praying for them, because the follow-up is a key piece. So if you would, that would be great. But I did want to let you know too, if there's any of you out there that are into golf, okay, we have a golf fundraiser for Youth for Christ. It's August 25 at Stonehenge out near Tunkhannock. It's a great tournament. It's a lot of fun. And so if you got a foursome, you got some people you want to play with, or you just have one or two, and you want to come and join us and have a good time playing golf and helping to raise some money for our ministry with Northeast PA Teens, that would be great. So if you want, these are on the back table back there. So if you're into golf, or you know somebody into golf that's into golf and they want to play, feel free to let them know. And then also too, if you want, we also look for door prizes that we give away too, to make the event a lot more fun and stuff. So if you have something you'd like to donate, or your business or organization would like to donate something, you can let us know that too. So it's one of our most significant fundraisers. So if you would, if you're interested in that, just let me know. And we always say, people that come to the golf tournament, they don't necessarily, all the people that play, they're not necessarily there for Youth for Christ. They're there for golf. We get that. We get it. But it's an opportunity for us to share the ministry of what we do. And also, I usually try to do a little bit of a gospel presentation, because we do know there are some men and women who come to play that are not believers, but they've just connected to our ministry. So if you would pray for that, and then if you know anybody would like to play golf, or if you'd like to play, and don't worry, I don't play. Okay, I don't play. We can organize it. I can organize it. I am not going to play, and you will thank me for that if you play golf. All right. But it's a good time. I'm going to destroy the place. All right. So today I want to challenge you with something, for in our ministry in Youth for Christ, I'm an advocate for young people and for wanting to share the gospel with young people, and to share share our faith with the next generation. So I'm going to really kind of challenge you in that. I don't always talk about that, but it is my passion. So you're probably going to hear it from me oftentimes. But for today, I want to challenge you with a couple of different passages from the scriptures. And some of them I'm just going to kind of review quickly for you and read. Then others will spend a little bit more time in. About my challenge is remember. So if you're looking at the back of your notes, it'll say remember and tell. Okay, so remember is our first point. And I'm going to open with a passage from Nehemiah. And it's in the beginning stages. And if you've been around church for a while, you know Nehemiah was an incredible leader. He was people used his organizational structure and Joshua to do studies in leadership and the way that they handled people and managed people and accomplished a goal. And Nehemiah's goal was to rebuild the wall around Jerusalem. And if you're familiar with the story, you know he went through a lot of painstaking work and got permissions and everything else and got materials and stuff, and they started rebuilding the wall. But he had heard a little bit of a scuttlebutt from a coalition of kings that surrounded Jerusalem, and those countries were plotting an attack and to try to stop the work that was built. It was about protecting Jerusalem, so they wanted to stop the work on that wall. And Nehemiah knew this was the ultimate important role for him, because it was protecting God's city of Jerusalem. And Nehemiah, this is what he said in chapter 4, and I'm just going to read these couple verses. He says, after I looked things over, in other words, the progress of the wall, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people. Now, I don't know how he did that in those days without sound systems and everything else, but he addressed all the people, and he said, don't be afraid of them. You know, those people out there that are kind of, making a little mess for us and trying to hinder us, trying to discourage us. Don't listen to them. Don't be afraid of them. And he said, remember the Lord. And then it says, who is great and awesome. And that word awesome isn't the same word that we use today. It's I use it way too flippantly. But the way that this description is that God is awesome. We should be full of awe thinking about who God is. And I've enjoyed the songs starting off here, talking about how awesome and incredible God is. Amen. He says, remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and get out there. He says, and fight for your brothers, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes. He says, remember the Lord. He's the one standing for us. In 1 Chronicles chapter 16, it says, remember the wonders he has done, his miracles and the judgments he pronounced. Remember. Now, obviously, we don't have to be told that we need to tell our kids and even our grandkids about God, or do we? If he's important to us, right, we'll just automatically pass it down, right? Or will we? I don't think it was just for fun that God told the Israelites in Deuteronomy chapter 6 to share the God of their fathers with their children. So you can bring up Deuteronomy chapter 6. And I'm just going to read this passage and just make a few comments on it before we move to another. In Deuteronomy 6, it says, these are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach, in other words, Moses, to teach you to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live, by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may enjoy long life. Hear, O Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your fathers, promised you. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give to you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. Notice verse 2 going all the way back, it says, so that you, your children, and their children after them, your grandchildren, may fear the Lord. And he repeats it again later on in chapter 11, except this time the writer, who we believe to be Moses, includes the phrase, it says, remember that it was not your children who saw everything. They didn't see all the miraculous stuff in the crossing of the Red Sea and everything else. And he says, or crossing the Jordan. He says, remember that it was not your children who saw it, but it was your own eyes that saw all these great things the Lord has done. Remember and tell. And since they didn't see it, you must tell them. In January 5th, 1967, Ronald Reagan made an incredible statement, and most of you have probably heard it before. He simply said, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. Do you remember that? Okay. Let me read you the context. Now, there's a difference between what he actually said and what was actually released to the press. So I'll give you a little bit of both. So what was released to the press, and as an official statement from him, was this: freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. Or, one day, we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like to live in the United States where men were free. Pretty startling, isn't it? Now, here's the crazy part. In what he actually said, which, people, when they get up, they stray from the script, right? I do it all the time. So I'm just glad you don't pick it up, right? But what happens is, he said in the actual speech, he said, because down through history, the nations who have known freedom and lost it never got it back again. The fear is that if we lose our faith into the next generation, we would never get it back again. If freedom is just one generation away from extinction, how much more our faith? And I spent some time years ago with a couple whose the wife's grandfather was an old-time preacher in the area years back, somewhere like up in Susquehanna County, that area. And unfortunately, her father didn't catch the faith from her grandfather until many, many years down the road of a long path of hard mistakes, incarceration, hurt, pain, and disappointment in their family. And the granddaughter didn't pick up the faith from her grandparents until years down her own road of hurt, pain, and disappointment. And it was incredible for me to hear her story about a missed generation that dropped the ball and didn't carry it forward to her generation. And in the United States right now, in Pennsylvania right now, there are 90,000 grandparents. In Pennsylvania, 90,000 grandparents raising over 190,000 grandchildren because there's a gap. There was a missed generation in there. Going back to Deuteronomy chapter 6, and you don't have to rush back to that. He said, impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, and when you lie down, and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands. And the Jewish people, some of you know a little bit about Jewish religion, they took that literally. They had them on their wrists and their foreheads. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. My paraphrase for that is, impress them on your children. Talk about them while you're having dinner, while you're driving down the road, while you're getting for school. And write them, if you have to, on the refrigerator. Okay? You know what verse was on our family's refrigerator for quite some time while our boys were in high school and the daughter was in middle school? Ephesians chapter 4, verse 32. Don't let any unwholesome word come out of your mouth, but only what is profitable for building other people up. That was our family verse on the refrigerator. Okay? But whose job is it to pass on the faith? Well, the politicians will say it's the government's job. Educators may say it's the school's job. Even Christian school teachers would say maybe it's the school's job. Some Christians say, well, it's the church's job to pass down the faith to my kids. And, that's why we pay a youth pastor, or maybe that's why we have a volunteer youth leader. Because it's their job, right? No, I think what Moses was saying here is the job of the family. But we'll take all the help we can get from other godly adults in the family is hugely important. In fact, there's a book by Chap Clark, his name is. He actually got permission to spend one full school year in a high school. And at the end of that, he wrote down what he observed. I mean, he did research the whole time, but he was given permission to have complete access to the school and the kids and to ask questions and whatnot. And at the end of it, he wrote a book called Hurt. And that was his description of the generation, Hurt. And his findings were that the teenagers who were making a successful move in life needed 7 adults that they could spend time with. 7 adults that would play a key role in their life to help them to grow. And Deuteronomy 6 focuses on families. And I will tell you this, I'm very, very thankful for our family, for the family that I grew up in, but also the family my wife grew up in, and the families of faith in those. Because one time we were having a conversation with my brother-in-law, and we said, like, you know, our kids have turned out where they're following God, and they're trying to raise their kids to follow God, our grandchildren. And we said, why is that? And the only thing that we come up with is because no matter which house they went to in our family, they were going to hear the same thing. And that has meant a huge, huge deal to me. Because if you remember a few weeks back when I spoke and I said, teenagers build their value systems on the experiences within their relationships. Because those relationships speak into their lives more than anything else, because they're trusted relationships. And I'll add more to that in just a little bit. And we agree. Our young people today make more moral decisions in a week than most of us ever had to when we were in high school for our whole adolescence. That's just the way that it is. And, you know, like we said before, you know, if a pastor said it or it was in the Bible, it was gospel truth, not anymore. It's just one place where they can get their information. Going back to Deuteronomy chapter 6, when we live life together with our children and our grandchildren, we have the opportunity to pass on the faith because of that trusted relationship. Of all the inputs in a kid's life, that trusted relationship says the most. And I believe that young people today do respect their grandparents. So I want to really encourage those of you here that are grandparents. I want to encourage you, because young people today have a fond affection in their heart, in their mind, for their grandparents. So please follow up with that. I'm going to challenge you with a few more things before we're done, but follow up with that. In Joel chapter 1, this is just verses 2 and 3. There was a great desolation in the land, and he says, "Hear this, you elders. Listen, all who live in the land. Has anything like this ever happened in your days or in the days of your forefathers?" And he says, "Tell it to your children, and let your children tell it to their children and their children to the next generation." Okay, I want you to hear what he said. Don't let your kids miss the point. Okay? Tell them the stories. Not just the Bible stories. Okay? I think sometimes we think we need to tell them the Bible stories. But I get it. The prodigal son, I might have mentioned this before, the prodigal son is why I didn't run away, okay? Because I knew I wasn't going to get dinner anywhere. And number 2, I knew it didn't go real well for the prodigal son, right? But it was the stories that my mom and dad were able to tell me about what God did in their life. Talk to your kids about your story. It doesn't matter if they're grown and out of the house. It doesn't matter. Let them know your story. I've found, you know, my kids are all married now and have kids. And every once in a while, I find myself talking to one of my kids saying, you know, I just want to remind you, this is what happened when you were real little. This is what happened before you were born. And we saw what God did in that. And that's a huge plus for a grandparent and a parent, and then for a grandparent. But I also want to challenge you to tell them their story. Allow them to see and to hear what God is doing in their life. And as you pray with them and see what God has done in their life, that's God moving in their life that they can't argue with later. Give them the experiences. I don't care if it's helping out somewhere in a service thing, Or going on a mission trip together. Parents and kids, grandparents and kids, go on a mission trip together. Okay? Do something. Go. I mean, it can be to Kentucky, it can be to Texas, or it can be to Africa. But be involved with your kids and give them those experiences where they see God at work in their life, in their story. And before I move on to the final passage, I want to go just the one statement back in Deuteronomy 6 that says, impress these stories on your kids and your grandchildren. Impress. It doesn't say, make your kids follow Jesus. That's not what it says. It doesn't even say, make them go to church. That's not what it says. It does mean live your life so that it's such an impression on them. There are some things we can't make our kids do, or our grandkids. And to give you a story way back from about 15 years ago, when my daughter was in high school, there was a guy she was hanging out with we weren't too keen on. And I said to her, Jenny, you are not allowed to hang out with him. I can't decide what you're going to do while you're in school. I can't watch that. You have to make up your own mind in school. But when you're out of school, I can make sure that you don't hang out with them because it's that important. Because I can't make her do something where she's somewhere where I can't follow her. She had to make that decision. Unfortunately, she made don't tell anybody. She made one wrong decision one night, and unfortunately, I ran campus life at her school, so I knew a lot of kids at her school. So when two of her friends said to me, hey, we saw Jenny last night. Oh, where'd you see her? I found out she was where she wasn't supposed to be. So when she came home, I said, hey, Jenny, where'd you guys go last night? Oh, we went here. And I said, oh, that's not where I heard you went. And she said, where did you hear that I went? I said, why don't you tell me? All right. And she got the point. Dad has the authority there. I didn't in school. But I had the authority after school and had to stick to it. See, because we can't make our kids follow Jesus. They're going to make their own decision. In the verse, Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go. And most of you older folks will remember this, right? What's the rest of it? And when he is old, he will not depart from it. It's not a promise. It's not a promise. It's something God guarantees. It's a proverb. It's generally true because hopefully they'll make a lot of right decisions, listen to their parents. Because the child, as he grows, can make up his own mind and his own decision. And some of you here knew my father from my dad's old Youth for Christ days and whatnot. And my dad was very clear when I started ministry, actually 40 years ago today, July 1, I started paid youth ministry. 40 years ago, July 1. And I remember my father drilling it into me, saying, Mage, a son or daughter makes up their own mind. All of us as parents make plenty of mistakes and we do our best. But a child is responsible before God for making up his mind to follow Jesus or not. And God, thankfully, loves them even more than we do. Psalm 78, I'll finish up with this one. Psalm 78, and it's a lengthy passage, the first 7 verses. But I want you to listen to what he's saying here. And this is, we believe to be David speaking. O my people, hear my teaching. Listen to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter hidden things from of old, what we have heard and known, what our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power and the wonders he has done. He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which he commanded our forefathers to teach their children, so the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born, and they in turn would tell their children. Then they would put their trust in God and would not forget his deeds, but would keep his commands. So here are the two things in this short bit. He says, remember and tell. Remember and tell. Jesus lived, died because he loved us. He rose again, And that makes him different from every other religion in the world. You can research anyone you want, but I believe you'll come back to Jesus because he's the only one that came back to life again.
Amen.
And I think I've shared with you my gospel presentation. You can look at greatexchange.me and you can see all the way that I share the gospel with young people. But that exchange where Jesus says, I'll take your sins and pay for them. And in return, I'll give you my perfection so that when God looks at you, all he sees is my perfection. That's the promise that Jesus gives. Nobody else can offer you that.
Amen.
Not Muhammad, not Buddha, not Confucius, nobody. You know, when I was a little kid and a young teen, like I said, I wouldn't run away because I knew the stories of like things like the prodigal son. And that's key because faithfulness to God is directly linked to remembering. Faithfulness to God is directly linked to remembering. In our own life and in the lives that we influence. Conversely, a lack of faithfulness to God is directly linked to forgetting. I'm in ministry today because I was told the stories. I remember the Bible stories, and I remember the stories of the teens that Dad used to influence. The trips, the events, the amounts of kids, the rallies that happened that changed lives. I still remember the story, and Ron, you might remember this one, where a girl broke into Dad's office one time in the middle of the night, and Dad got a call at home from the police because she just had to talk to Jerry Major, my father. I remember that story. I remember 3 teens from Abington Heights who got saved their senior year of high school and traveled with Dad's singing group, and now they're all retired from their own ministries or the ministries of their spouses because they accepted Christ during their senior year at Abington Heights High School. I remember the story of Don Murley, how God changed his life through Youth for Christ as a teenager and difficult things that he went through as a young man. And Don is he's passionate about Youth for Christ and our ministry, and he actually did my presentation with it. If you go to that website, he actually did that recording for me because of what God did in his life through Youth for Christ. I'm in ministry because I wanted my life to be about those stories. I wanted my life to be about those kinds of stories, like Kristen that accepted Christ and spent time on the mission field because of our ministry. Jason, who accepted Christ because I met him at a football game over here at Valley View High School. Chris, who went to Valley View, got saved in high school, and then came to our ministry and was discipled through us. And John, who was the first kid ever to accept Christ at Burger King in Westside. You know what? I wanted my life to be about those stories. But more importantly, I wanted my life to be about the stories of Jay Major and Kyle Major and Jenny Major Cody. And the time that I was able to spend with them, I could cry about. And for some of you having a great relationship with your children, it's an awesome thing to look back on. Probably the most important thing in my life. I could care less about anything else but Jay, Kyle, and Jenny following Jesus. And I'm so thankful for the people in their lives that helped us to raise them. Because if it was up to their mom and dad, they'd be a mess. Okay, we used to say, you know, they turned out well in spite of their parents, and it was a joke. Now it's not a joke. Okay. And here was the kicker for me, and I hope you don't mind me sharing this with you. But when they got married, all 3 are married. When they got married, they didn't ask dear old dad to do the wedding. They had other pastors that had an influence in their life that they wanted to do their wedding, and they said, "Dad, we just want you to be dad on that day." And that meant the world to me. There were other men and women in their lives that they wanted to do the wedding or be at the wedding because of the spiritual influence that they had in their lives. Unfortunately, not all kids and teenagers in your community have loving parents and grandparents. And I'm going to say this to you because I want you to hear this from someone who works with teenagers on a daily and weekly basis. There are kids in your community who God has never heard their name in prayer even once. Did you get that? God has never heard teenagers in your community, has never heard their name once in prayer. If you would commit to praying for a young person, you will change their life. Just to talk about them before God. Any teenager you know, middle school student, any teenager, young person you know. In Northeast PA, there's 50,000 teenagers in our high schools. That's just the high schools. 96% of them, I might have mentioned this before, 96% of them don't have any relationship with the church or youth ministry. 96%. Every lost teenager is just one caring adult away from becoming a lifelong follower of Jesus. For you, a teen in your life, okay, whether it's a family member or niece, nephew, whatever, for a teen in your life, would you commit to praying for them? And that God holds on to them through the mishmash of what middle school and high school is like? Would you pray for them? And don't stop. Don't stop when they graduate. Keep praying for them. Maybe it's a grandchild, niece, nephew, a teen, teens in the church here, or a teen that lives down the street. Pray for them. Pray for your grandkids often. I will say this, I love seeing Bill, I love seeing your updates about you and your granddaughter. To me, that is awesome. I love it. Okay? Those things are where relationships are built. And the last thing I'm going to challenge you with is this. When we came in today and VBS is happening, I want you to know, I can't even tell you how many times I have heard a teenager or a young person or even an adult say, oh yeah, there was a family down the street that cared enough about me to invite me to VBS. And I went to VBS. Or I went to a youth group because they invited me down the street, the family down the street. Or this one yet, I did accept Jesus. It was at VBS, at that little church down the street. That's the role you can play in just 1 week of ministry that is so powerful. A lot of churches are not doing that type of a ministry, but VBS can be so powerful. Would you pray and do everything you can to make VBS an awesome week? She didn't pay me to say that. I'm just saying, what an incredible opportunity you have as a church to work together to pull off a VBS. That's a great time, great food, whatever else is needed, and if there's money or time needs to be spent, that is what your church can have an outreach in. So that's just my challenge for you. God, I thank you very much for this church who patiently listened to my sharing my passion that I believe you've given me to see young people follow after you. And for God, it starts in our families. It starts with us remembering and telling. I pray, God, that you would give us the courage, and maybe it's even the courage just to have a granddaughter or grandson or a niece or nephew say, oh, come on, Grandpa, you're talking about that again? Yeah. It's the most important thing I can have to talk about. So God, I pray for the moms and dads, grandparents, aunts, uncles, God, that you would allow them to have the influence on the younger generation to follow after you. And to see this church, not just to see this church thrive, but to see people in this community know and understand the love of Jesus Christ because of a love of another adult. In Jesus' name. Amen.
If you'd like to stand with us, we'll